So I've got Matt Reed, who is head of digital at Space and Time, which is a full service media agency providing advertising solutions both on and offline. As head of digital, his role is to help define and deliver Space and Time's digital offering. He works with clients to make sure they're using the right mix of digital channels and most effective strategy to help them achieve the goals. I have first-hand experience of Matt, and I would describe him as bold, brave. I certainly chased him down a mountain in a pair of skis, so I know he's very brave. And I'll be interested to see how that follows through actually into his leadership style. He's determined, ambitious, but he's also really emotionally intelligent, particularly as a leader, but also just generally as a human being. He leads a team of 46 people, and at such a young age, I think that's incredible. There are many things that I'm intrigued when it comes to Matthew, which is why I wanted to interview him. He is, first of all, is a digital marketer, and for me, that's a bit of a dark art. I know I drive him crackers when I have any questions about my website or anything else. But he's also been recognised through Beamer 100, not just once, but twice, as being an individual who's helping shape the future of Britain's digital industry. And that is just so flipping impressive. And I want to dig into that a little bit more. I'm also really intrigued to hear about his experience at Amazon, because he's worked at Amazon. And I've read and heard all sorts of things about Amazon. And so really looking forward to hearing his first-hand experience. And then finally, the fact he's a millennial, but I wouldn't say he's your average millennial at all. And again, one of my fascinations is the differences between the different generations, the impact from a parenting perspective, but also environmental perspective, and how that shapes a generation. But all in all, I think he's just got a really modern take on leadership, and that's what I'm excited to hear about today. Matthew also happens to be my stepson, and I am so proud of him as a human being. I've known him since he was 6 years old. Both his dad and I are really proud of him. And I just feel so lucky to have you in my life. It's a blessing. So we're going to move on now to a day in the life of Matthew Reed. But also, I'm really intrigued, just so that the audience get an idea of what your average day is like as head of digital. But as we're in lockdown or semi-lockdown, whatever you want to call it, because your average day isn't your average day, is it, at the minute? But help demystify your role. So maybe pre-lockdown, day in the life of.
So it is an interesting one, because even pre-lockdown, no 2 days are the same. It is one of the things I love about the industry I work in, is that, really no 2 days are the same. But I guess to quantify what an average day might look like, there is a level of checking in with the teams that I work with and kind of catching up with them and understanding what they're working on, any issues coming up. There's an element of, assessing where we're at with, say, new business prospects or current client pitches or any kind of internal projects. And I guess it kind of fits into those three realms. There's the internal projects that we're working on and the internal team, the current existing clients and any projects there, and then new clients and new business. But it is very different day to day. And I think actually a colleague of mine summed it up quite well recently. Basically said the higher you go in this industry, it becomes more and more just a problem solving job. So when you start off in this industry, as I did, 10, 11 years ago, it's very much a practitioner's role of you have set work to do and you sit down and do that work. And I always liken it to being, say, a bricklayer. You're there hired to lay the bricks. And then as you move up and up and you gain more experience, maybe you become the project manager or the foreman, and you don't actually do any bricklaying anymore, even though that was what you were really good at to start with. And eventually you're so far removed from it and you're managing the whole project and the whole build that thing you were really good at to start with is so kind of far in the distance, but you have the experience of it and you've gained lots of other experience along the way. And it becomes more, rather than a doing job of laying the brick, it becomes more a problem solving job of how do we make sure everything's done and everything's done right. And so a lot of my day to day, the reason why it's so varied is, in a way, it's kind of, well, what are the current problems? What are the current things that we need to deal with? And the word problem has a negative connotation, but that's also a positive connotation, because the problem might be, how do we move forward, or how do we increase revenues, or how do we put in a better process? So yeah, I'd say day to day, there are those three areas, but in general, it's just solving the current problems across the business.
You know, that is really fascinating, because you sound like your dad. That is literally what he does as well. Yeah. And it's and also I can see those traits in your little sister as well. So that's interesting.
There you go. Must be in the genes. Yeah,
it must be in the genes. Yeah, and a little bit later we might talk about nature versus nurture.
Yes. Yeah. Which I've got quite a strong opinion on, with the whole millennial thing as well, of what we see, but we can come on to that, obviously.
No, come on, let's talk about it now. Let's go for it.
Well, it's an interesting one, because even I've only been in proper full-time work, I suppose, for 11 years after uni, but even in that short time, I've seen personally a big change in kind of how managers have had to adapt their style. And I'd say I've had to do the same myself as I became a manager and took on more and more people. And I do think a lot of that is a generational thing of how people react to management. When I started out, a lot of it was, you'd hear managers use phrases like, I'm going to have to bollock that person, or, can I have a minute? And it would be very managers. It was almost the manager to employee relationship was one of almost like aggressive parent, of kind of, I'm not really going to praise you when you do well, I'm just going to tell you when you've done wrong. And actually, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It was fine for me, and it was kind of how I've been brought up in a way. A lot of my experiences as a child were like that, more kind of being told when you've done something bad, not necessarily praised when you've done something good. So for me, it felt quite natural. But I definitely, over the last 10-11 period, have seen that shift where younger and younger people who come in can't handle it. And it's not, and I'm not saying youngsters today just don't know how to deal with it, but I think they've been conditioned in a different way. And the example I can give is, I won't name names, obviously, that'd be very rude to, but I remember working with a particular employee who started in my team. This was a couple of years ago, and we had a 3-month probation period, and unfortunately she got to the end of the 3 months and she'd done it okay, but there was things that we were missing, and we kind of needed more from her to really say, yes, you can do this job long term. And it was her first job out of uni. She hadn't had a job before, so that's to be expected. But we liked her and she was trying her hardest. So what we thought was, well, we won't let you go. We'll extend your probation by another 3 months. So the way I approached it was, you've done okay, but there are a few things we're missing. You need to know that this is right for you as much as we need to know it's right for us. So we'll extend your probation from 3 months to 6 months. And instantly it was floods of tears. It was really, really upset. She didn't want to be there anymore. She actually then the next day quit. She brought HR in. She was mortified by the whole situation, took it really, really badly. And I was trying to explain to her, it's not a negative. Do not take it like that. We're not saying you can't do the job. And I'll never forget what she said to me. And it was essentially, no one has ever told me I failed before in my life. And looking into it, obviously I'd be making some assumptions, but when I went back over her CV, she'd gone through school kind of all A's, A stars, gone through college, all A's, gone to uni, got a first, came from what I think was quite a well-off background. And I don't know her personally, but from the surface, you'd say seemed to have quite a good upbringing. And so it seemed very much like, wow, at 22, 23 years old, this was the very first time she was being told she hadn't done okay at something. She hadn't absolutely smashed something. And like I say, it wasn't in an aggressive way. It wasn't that she'd done horrendous at it. It was actually quite a mild way compared to, say, what maybe I experienced in my first, times at work. I remember being yelled at, you've done this terribly wrong, or what the F do you think you're doing? And that was quite insightful because, some people in that situation might say, well, you don't want people like that. Just get rid of them and get people who can handle it. And my answer back to that is, well, unfortunately, I think this is a generational thing and this is the workforce we have. So unfortunately, as managers, it's not for them to adapt to our management style. Our management style has to adapt to the people that are coming into the workplace because we can't control that. If that's how they're coming out of school and home life, where I think parents talk about it a lot. Parents and schools both really struggle these days to tell their kids when they've done rubbish at something, or they've not won, or they've failed. And so if we're going to be delivered that workforce, we have to be able to then adapt to that, which is really challenging. And it's so different to, like I say, although I'm kind of in that millennial bracket, it's so different to my upbringing and so different to my first experiences of work. So definitely a challenge.
And that's why I say you're not the typical, you don't display the typical traits of a millennial. And you know, I was sat there wincing actually when you were saying some of the things, because I thought, oh my God, you know, when I think about, I watched Simon Sinek's, I don't know how to pronounce his name, video, and he was talking about millennials, and it was really interesting, but also criticising the existing group of parents that are coming through, which is me, and saying how we smooth the way for our children. And I know that I do that, your little sister, and it's a real challenge. You know, we're accused of being helicopter parents and all that sort of thing. And I was saying the other day that I remember one of my first experiences of my daughter's school was listening to a song where they were singing "You Are a Star Just the Way You Are." So, you know, which is a beautiful thing. It is a beautiful thing, don't get me wrong. And in fact, on my door behind, there's a sign that says "You're perfect in every way." And I do fundamentally believe that. I do believe that people are born perfectly, but then they accumulate crap throughout that childhood, which can bend us out of shape sometimes.
Yeah.
But if we're smoothing the way for people so that they don't experience those things, so they don't lose on sports day or whatever else it is, then you end up with the situation that you've just described, because it's the first time that they've experienced real negativity in their life.
Yeah, and I think where it gets muddled for me is there are two sides to that. I'm not for a minute saying people aren't perfect the way they are. Everyone should be happy with who they are. And I don't have a problem with that, you know, but I think where that has got muddled is, well, if we're saying that people should be happy the way they are, we have to tell them that they're great at everything. And that's two different things. For example, I absolutely love football. I'm terrible at playing football. Absolutely awful. And I can't play football for crap, but I love it. But that would be wrong then for someone to say to me, you know, it's fine to say, yeah, that's fine that you can't play football. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing to feel bad about for that. But what's not okay is to say, yes, you could be a Premier League football player, because I couldn't. It's just not possible.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the balance, is that, you know, I worry for a generation of people who might, the first time they might get told that they're not very good at something is when they're 22, 23. Now, I remember the first time I got told I wasn't very good at something, you know, and it was from a very young age. And so as an adult, it's fine. Like, you're used to it. You understand you can't be good at everything. And there are certain things you can get better at and you can teach yourself and you can learn and grow. And there are certain things that you're just naturally not good at, like football.
Yeah.
But that's my concern, is how we deal with that management challenge of, this is going to be almost their first trauma in that way of, okay, I'm at this age and you're going to tell, you know, we're going to tell them they're not very good at something. How do we balance that and do it in a way that helps them move forward, rather than that being such a, you know, huge dilemma? Like I say, for this particular person I was talking about, she ended up quitting. She actually ended up going into their completely different industry. And it's a shame, because she could have done really well in our industry. And it was just literally one comment of, we just need a few more months.
In your opinion, you know, thinking about her, because the perspective I come from is that we're born perfectly from a strength and basic innate talents ability.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, even so to use an example, like with your sister, she has an innate inbuilt talent for detecting tastes and smells. So we play a bit of a game at dinner time. We'll say, right, okay, what are the ingredients in the food?
Right.
Now, that is associated with her sensory processing challenges and dyspraxia. So that could be perceived as being different and also a weakness or whatever else, depending on what mindset you take. But she is born perfectly just the way she is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
you know, then to be able to then use those talents and abilities later on in life, hence the next question, which is, so thinking about that lady who then sacked herself or resigned,
Yeah.
did she have the innate talents and abilities to do the job? So did she have natural strengths in that area? Or was it, because, you know, when we did the prep for this interview, you said there was a brilliant quote you used, which was, can I use it?
Yeah, I use it all the time.
I can teach anyone digital marketing. I can't teach someone not to be an arsehole.
Yeah.
And I love that, you know, from when I used to work in HR. I think that is so true. Yeah. So where do you sit with this person? Was it to do with innate talents and abilities, or was it more?
It was more a personality thing. I think the thing with our industry is at that level, when we bring people in kind of first through the door, it doesn't matter their kind of innate ability in one area or the other, because it's not like, say, I don't know, something like accountancy where you would need that kind of foundation in, say, maths or numbers. You know, with ours, yes, that could help. And if you came in and you had a real strong skill set in maths, you could send people down a certain route, say down a route of kind of analysis and data processing. If they came in with a really innate ability for the written language, you can send them down a different route. And that's the beauty of our industry as well, is that we have a very, very kind of, I guess we have everything from the most creative point to the most analytical point and everything in between. And so when we bring people in, or when I was in that role and we were bringing people in, we'd bring people in and we'd actually get them to do a bit of everything, and we'd see what works well. And the best people that I ended up working with were the ones who would really latch onto something, and they'd kind of put themselves forward, and they'd kind of learn more in that particular area and kind of grow in that specific one. Some people came in and kind of stayed a bit good at everything, but then difficult to push that person up and up. So at that point, at that stage, I had no qualms at all that she would have the ability to go down one of those paths. She absolutely would, whether it be the English side or the numbers side or anything else, or the client service side. You know, some people are just really personable and we put them that way, other people aren't, and they don't speak to clients, and that's totally fine. I think that was more just, and the closest, it sounds ridiculous, but the closest word I can use, it was like heartbreak to her, being told that she just hadn't 100% smashed something the first time she tried it. And this is not an uncommon thing. Like I say, I've worked over the last few years, seen more and more on the other side of it, people come in and after 6 months of working in a job, asking for pay rises and promotions. You know, like literally from day one, well, how do I get promoted? Well, you've been here 2 days, so let's just wait, let's do some work. And it sounds ridiculous, but it is more and more what we come up against, because there's all, and I feel for people, and I do feel for them in that way, because I almost wonder if it's, again, I can't imagine it because it didn't happen for me, but I suppose the way I think about it is, if you've been told all your life up to that point, you are amazing, you are the best, you can do anything, and then you go into a job where there's 100, 200, 300 people who are better at it than you, who've been there for longer and above you, and you're sat there thinking, well, how do I get there as quick as possible? Well, I should be able to, because I'm the best at everything. So I should be able to just work up there straight away. And I think it's interesting when I interview people now, I often ask people, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And more often than not, I'll get, in 5 years, I want to be running my own agency, running my own department. And you think, wow, that's, you know, I've been in it 11 years and been fortunate to do very well. But trust me, that, you know, even I'm not at that point, and that would be miraculous in any industry, to go from walking through the door as a 20-year-old exec to running the business in 5 years. That's not going to happen. But that's the kind of the mindset, which is great in one set. I suppose it makes them ambitious, but it's just difficult when you then have to tell them they've done something wrong.
Yeah. So, yeah. No, I love that. That's cool. So you said you've been very fortunate to do very well. I think that's nonsense. You've not been fortunate. I think it's been blood, sweat, hard work, focus, determination, all the things that I know, you know, you are. So come on, let's talk about this Beamer 100 and, you know, tell me about it.
Oh God. So yeah, that came about a few years ago, the first time, when lady who was in charge of PR at my old agency decided to put me forward for it. And it basically, you have to nominate, someone has to nominate you, and it's based on achievements within the industry. So my nomination came off the back of a few different bits that I had done. So I had spoke at an industry conference called PPC Hero Conf, which is one of the kind of biggest in our industry. And then at that conference, my talk got voted the best technical talk of the conference, which is quite nice. So I got to speak on a panel at the end, with the other winners from the other kind of sectors. And I think in the same year, I basically got our first ever case study with Google on some work that I'd done for a client. And it was little bits like that. And she put together a profile of the growth that I'd had with clients, the kind of external talks and articles and achievements and kind of industry stuff I'd done, and basically put that all together to say, look, this is someone who's helping drive the industry forward. And so, so basically was chosen to be in the 100 selected people who are considered the influential people in the digital industry that year. So that was year one. The next year, I wasn't put forward for it, so that's fine. And then the year after, which was last year, actually I didn't know I was going to be put forward for it. A colleague of mine decided to put me forward for it. So actually, a guy, Jack, I'll give him a shout out because he did me a favour there. he decided to put me forward for it. So he went on and he put together a big thing and basically said, oh, Matt's done all this. He's helped grow our business. He's helped do X, Y, and Z. And got fortunate again to be picked out again, which was very nice. So so that's it, really.
How do you feel about that?
Mixed. For me, the nice thing in it is more a colleague recognizing that a colleague appreciating what you do. That for me is much better than any external industry award. In a way, I don't want to belittle the achievement, but in a way, those industry awards, I think how much of it is putting the right thing forward, writing it in the right way, the people who apply for it, popularity contests, all those different things. Yes, you have to have foundations there to be able to apply for it, but it's still a lot of PR in a way. Whereas, the idea of a colleague kind of putting you forward for it is better. And actually at that agency, we had an internal reward system. Actually, one of the best things I've seen at a business in our industry, and I think it works well, again, given the kind of staff that we have, which is basically every month, every employee in the business got given like points, and you could use these points to thank other members of the business. And when you got enough points, you could use them to get an Amazon voucher, a meal out, whatever you might want. And it was really great because you had to kind of go onto a public forum and put in, I'd like to thank this person for doing this. Here's 50 points.
Nice.
And actually, although that's an internal system, that would give me much greater joy, in knowing I've been able to help colleagues and you're seen as valued in the business. The external things are nice, but for me, it doesn't compare to that internal kind of just knowing you've done a good job, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. So I want to move on now to Amazon. So tell me about that experience. Because, I mean, it's a massive achievement in itself, isn't it? To have got the role that you were
It's a long interview process, yeah.
Give us an overview. Remind me of that interview process.
Yeah, so it was a unique one, and I'm sure people have read, different horror stories about Amazon and different good and bad things. I actually found the interview process quite interesting. It was definitely difficult. It started off with 2-hour-long interviews, which kind of delved into questions about what you work on, what you do, kind of, day to day, what attributes you have. And then basically, if you get through those 2 interviews, you go to like an interview day, which was, how many was it? 6 interviews back to back. So you literally rock up there at 9 a.m. and you have interview after interview for 6 hours with an hour break for lunch. And they're all hour-long interviews. They're very intense. It's different people from different areas of the business who come in and do them. And the idea behind it from Amazon is Amazon have these leadership principles that they want everyone to align with. So you kind of have to learn all them by heart beforehand. And you have to tailor everything you're doing to why you fit with those leadership principles. And then the people who interview you, some will be from the area you're going to work in. So obviously I went into the advertising part of Amazon. So a couple of the interviews were from people from the advertising part. But then some of the interviews could be someone from the packing department or from, Prime TV or anything, or Kindle, because the idea is, yes, they might not know what you're going to do day to day, but they know the Amazon principles and they're looking to see if you have them. So very intense, very, very data driven. They were much more interested in, all the numbers behind everything and how everything would run, rather than necessarily the emotional side or opinion. It was more, give us the actual facts and figures behind everything. So I had to have a lot of numbers in the back of my head memorized from growth over the previous 3 years and different work I'd done and efficiencies and everything like that. Very, very intense process, and very fortunate to get through it all, which was great. I wasn't expecting to. The actual job itself, I actually was only at Amazon for just under a year, about 10 months. It wasn't for me culturally. There was, again, I'm sure people have heard different things about Amazon. I had my gripes with it. It wasn't a cultural fit in the sense that I'd always worked for kind of independent businesses beforehand. And when I went there, it is much more corporate. It's a completely different scale. There's not that personal element. And I suppose tying back to the previous question, where you have that recognition from colleagues and you all work together. What I loved about my previous place and what I love about where I'm at now is you get that kind of family feel of you're all in it together. Yes, one person might own the business, a few people might own the business, but you're working together as a team. You're really good friends, both in work and out of work. You're all pushing towards the same end and you help each other out. Amazon felt much more like everyone for themselves within the business. And, no one really had time for each other unless they were you could tell when people were talking to you, there's always that thought, well, what am I going to get out of this? How am I going to better my career here by talking to you about what you want from me? And so culturally, I didn't fit the place. Work-wise, it went very well. I was very happy with the work I was doing. I think they were very happy with the work I was doing. I obviously passed my probation. They wanted me to stay on. They didn't want me to leave when I handed my notice in, which was obviously nice to hear. But yeah, it just culturally wasn't for me. And I needed to go back to somewhere where I felt more of a team, I think.
Yeah, no, well, it's interesting you say that, which segues nicely into the next topic, which is about what's important to you, at work. And, we refer to these often as values, and sometimes they can be completely unconscious, so we're not aware of them. So you've been using the word teamwork, you've also used the word recognition quite a bit, and we have different levels of priority as well with our values. And the reason I like to explore values with people on the podcast is that I want to get to the source of who they are as people. So who are they really inside, and where does that come from? But also the source, the really interesting stuff about, so for example, where those values come from. And we can have what we refer to as towards and away from values. And so one of the examples, which I've talked about before, either in blogs or podcasts. So one of my values is achievement, but I would refer to that as an away from value. So it comes from a position of I was running away from a lack of achievement. And then what you get these inextricable links to beliefs as well around that support and keep that value in place. And these beliefs are then, they come as a result of our childhood experiences. So for me personally, I was a massive underachiever. I talk about being sat on thick table, like Peter Kay said, that was me on the thick table. And I was just so massively below average, and then at best average. Which then out of that, what was born was this need for achievement, so running away from. But then equally, we can have values that are born out of positive experiences. So one of my values is freedom, which was born out of a result of having lots of freedom growing up. 70s latchkey kid, given lots of freedom and choice, but then that's why I'm an entrepreneur. I'll run my own business. I don't want to work with anyone else. A lone wolf, because I don't like my wings clipped. So I therefore seek out experiences towards that positive value. So from your perspective, what what 3 things are really important to you at work?
So I think for me, they're all kind of the same theme. Honesty is really important to me. Really, really important. No, and we'll come on to why kind of historically, but within our business, it's so important. We work in an industry where mistakes happen all the time. It's one of those things that one of the things I say to any person coming into our industry is there will be some point, in your career where you will massively screw up and you'll either waste a load of a client's money, something won't go on, something bad will happen. We've all done it. I've done it. Everyone has done it in this industry. People who say they haven't are lying. And for me, those mistakes happen. They're a part of life, right? I'm never going to do is berate someone for a mistake. It happens. But what's important to me is that they're honest about it, and that they're really honest about, when they found it. Don't try and hide it. Don't try and hide it from me or the client or anyone else. Let's just be honest about it. Let's learn from it and let's move on, and let's try and not let it happen again. So honesty is really important. And I suppose hand in hand with that, the two things hand in hand with that are transparency and probably more importantly, accountability. Now, accountability is, again, another one of those terms that almost has a negative connotation of, well, you've got to be accountable for the mistake you made. But to me, accountability is also a positive in that you have to be accountable for the good things as well. So people are very good at being accountable when they did something great. Like, yeah, that was my work. I did that. I deserve the praise. And that's great. You should totally be accountable for the positive things you did. And people should also make sure you're accountable for the positive things you did. So if someone did a really good job, let's make sure they know they did and that they're accountable for that, and they should get the praise. But at the same time, you should be accountable for when things go wrong, or if you messed up, or if things weren't quite up to scratch. And that's also fine. It's about how we then deal with that. But yeah, if people are kind of honest and transparent in what they're doing and accountable for the work they're doing, that's all I ask of people. The mistakes and the things that come with it, they happen, we get round them, we learn from them. But yeah, it's very important to me that people, are honest and accountable.
Yeah. And what's interesting about what you just said there is it's how we deal with it. Because I've seen so many organisations and leaders that screw up because they don't handle mistakes correctly, and I am a big fan of black box thinking, which is a great book, and it is all about dealing with failure in the right way and learning from failure and learning from mistakes. And when you look at top sportsmen and women, they are continually building on those mistakes and growing and learning, and that's how we develop a growth mindset.
Absolutely.
Unless a team, it feels safe to admit to mistakes, then they're going to cover them up, aren't they? So how do you handle your team's mistakes? What would you say your secret is?
I think I don't know if it's I don't know if it's a secret or any better at it than anyone else. I suppose my approach is almost I like to try and make work I suppose it sounds ridiculous really, but a safe environment where they feel comfortable that they can be accountable and honest about things. I don't like that old style of, well, it's not that I don't like it, I just don't think it works anymore, of that, can I have a minute, I'm going to take you in a room away from everyone else and yell at you, and then people might know something happened or not, and then I'm going to tell you not to speak about it. You don't want people living on eggshells. No one wants to go to work worrying about when they get to work, or worrying about, is someone going to ask them about something? No one, it's not nice. And I don't want people working for me who feel like that. When people hand their notice in, if people are generally not happy here, I would always say to someone, I don't want you to stay if you're not happy. I'm sad that you're not, and I'd love to fix it and work with you on that. But the last thing I ever want is someone working somewhere where they're not happy, or they feel they can't be themselves or work in the way that works for them. So, I think for me, it's creating that environment where you explain why it's important, why they should take accountability, and what those consequences are and how it works. And I'll give you an example that we're dealing with at the moment. We're introducing time tracking in my current workplace, right? Now, this is one of those ones where, rightly so, people could think this is a bit big brotherish. Are you just trying to figure out what I'm doing when I'm doing it and when I'm not? And the reason why I'm bringing time tracking in is actually it's more to assess where are the areas we're spending too much time, not enough time, which clients are getting enough time, which aren't, how operationally as a business, how are we functioning? Are we spending time in the right areas? It is not to drill down on any one particular person. And, berate them because they spent 10 minutes longer on something than they should have. That happens. So I trust people to do their job and do it in the right way. But that's where you have to create that safe environment, because otherwise people could look at that and just go, oh God, they're bringing in this time tracking to watch everything we're doing. So yeah, I think it's about communication. So for example, in that scenario, for me, the way I got around it, or the way I tried to help it, we'll see the outcome of it, is when we introduced the time tracking, I got on a call with every person that we were asking to do it, explained to them what we wanted them to do, but rather than just explaining to them and then leaving them to it, I then went through all the reasons behind it. So really explain to them in depth, these are the reasons, this is what we're trying to achieve from it, this is where we're trying to go. And I think if you're clear with people and honest and open about what you're trying to achieve, and you work with them rather than against them, then you'll create that environment where they also feel more able to be honest and work with you. So I'd like to think I do that well. It is difficult. I've definitely learned over time. There are downfalls with it and there are good bits with it. But yeah, I think the more honest and open kind of environment you can create, the better for everyone, really.
And again, this makes me smile sat here listening to you, because that's where you're like your dad. Where I would say you two are different is that you have got the added secret superpower of empathy. You're very empathetic, whereas your dad is, he won't saying this, he doesn't sugarcoat it, but you do know where you stand with your dad. He is a blunt Yorkshireman.
And that's probably a generational thing as well.
Yeah. But what I know about you is that, and again, this is where you're really emotionally intelligent. I know you think very deeply about people, and you think about the implications of anything that you're doing. I saw it when we were on holiday, on our last day of holiday together. And so. But I think that works in your favour, and that's why you do get your nominations for your awards, and people value that.
Yeah, I just, like I say, I think the hardest thing I find at work, don't get me wrong, if something's gone wrong with a client or I've not done a piece of work well, I take it really, really hard. I hate doing a substandard job, and it kills me. If I think I've not done something to the best of my ability or the business ability. But the thing that hurts me more is when I see a staff member who's not happy, or they're struggling, or I feel like I've let them down, and it is difficult, and I take a lot of that on board. But that's why everything I try and put in place, I do try and do, and it might not always seem it, and I'm very conscious of this. From the outset, it might seem that I'm putting stuff in place to help the business, which obviously I am, but it's also coming from a point of view to help the people, because the people then help the business. So like the time tracking or any of the processes that we're looking to put in place. So yeah, my thought is normally from a starting point of, well, how can I help all the team? Because if I help all the team, they'll all work better because they'll be able to, which in turn will help the business grow.
Yeah. No, that's great. So my next question is link to your values, and that is because typically our values are formed around about age 10-ish. And they come as a result of either repeat conditioning, so your poor old sister pushed into her about being polite and please and thank yous and all that, so that's an example of repeat conditioning. Or it can come as a result of, as I say, these experiences that we have in childhood that create the beliefs, which then make something important. So if transparency, honesty, accountability and trust are important to you, where does that come from? What was kind of, or give me an example of an experience.
And I was thinking about this when we were talking about it earlier. I think for me, there's two kind of reference points I would point to in my childhood that have shaped both my values and also the way I work and who I am in work. The first one, in terms of values, would come from the fact that, so I suppose caveat in that obviously I didn't, although you're my stepwoman and obviously dad, I didn't grow up with you guys because I've just realised if I start telling a story about my childhood that sounds awful, just for the audience, I didn't obviously grow up with you guys. I grew up with my...
No, we saw you at weekends though, didn't we, babe?
Yes, yeah. But day to day, so with my obviously biological mother, who I don't unfortunately have a relationship with now, but a lot of those values come from when me and Lydia, my other sister, when we were kids, you didn't really know day to day what was going to happen, or what life was going to be like. And that was anything from, whether or not she was, so a simple starting point was whether or not she was going to be at home. We'd go months sometimes without seeing her, and you wouldn't know where she was or what was going on. And then other times she'd be there all the time. And sometimes she would be really nice, other times she'd be really awful. It'd be wake ups at 2 a.m. to go and do something, so whether it be waking up at 2 a.m. to get in the car and go and buy a bottle of wine at the 24-hour garage, or even as extreme as driving across the country to go and vandalize an ex-boyfriend's car, and it was very, very erratic. We don't have time for it now, but obviously one of the biggest stories with that was, a holiday I was taken on where I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know who I was staying with. I didn't know where the plane was going to take me, and I was kind of left on my own in another country for a period of time without her, which was quite a surreal experience. And I think that is what kind of shapes those values, in that I hate not knowing things. I really hate not knowing things, really hate not knowing what's going on, both from, and it served me well from a work point of view, because I'm incredibly curious about every bit of work we do. As I was saying earlier about our work, there's loads of different arms of it. There's creative arms, analytical arms, everything. There's loads of them. And I try and know as much about all of them as I can. And as I've gone through the business, you understand, well, I can't be an expert on all of them. It's not possible. But I really try and hold on to as much as possible and know everything, because it frustrates me not knowing what's going on. And then equally with staff, I think that's why it's really important to me to know where I stand, to know what's happening. Because, that kind of erratic nature of not knowing what was going on all the time was really tough as a kid, because you just didn't know. Like, you wake up every day and you think, no idea what's going to happen today, no idea what kind of person I'm going to deal with, whether that person's going to be here or not, what we're going to do with that person, where we're going to be by the end of the day, it was tough. And I think the other thing, the other part that always sticks in my mind in terms of the way I work, and maybe why I wouldn't be classed as a typical millennial, was growing up, me and my sister were very, I suppose, different in ways. She was definitely a hell of a lot smarter than me. I make no bones about it. In terms of book smarts at school, she was very, very smart. She seemed to have a way of just being able to rock up to an exam, having done no practice, and just get an A every time, whereas I failed a lot of mine. And she was very, very smart. And there was a time when she's 3 years older than me. So she went to the grammar school for high school, where you had to do the 11 plus exam, obviously, to get in. And I distinctly remember when I was that age, finishing primary school, and my mum very clearly said to me, I'm not going to put you in for the 11 plus exam because you're not smart enough. And that sounds awful, but in a way, I don't necessarily think she did it for the right intentions. She might have thought at the time she was trying to protect me. I don't necessarily think that, knowing the kind of person she was. But for me, growing up, I had the realization quite early that I just didn't feel that smart or that capable. And, I then went...
this is where I really want to interrupt you and go, oh, bloody well, look at you now.
Well,
Look how amazingly successful you are. And I know, even before we started this podcast, you said, and I was like, just so proud of you. You are amazingly successful. And you were like wincing inside, like, I don't flipping say that. But you are really successful, and you're a fine example of, and this is why I run this podcast, because what I noticed with you execs, and you only come on this program if you're really successful. So, and one of the trends I notice is that success does come from some form of adversity. And whilst it's not nice, so it's almost like if you want your kid to be successful, kick them while them down, that we're not encouraging that sort of thing, not at all. But it's interesting how it drives success on.
Yeah, and I think the difference where you were talking earlier about driving away from kind of failure or, not being intelligent. I don't necessarily feel that for me. I think it was more just then wanting to just feel pretty adequate. And that's kind of what I do feel like day to day. Genuinely don't feel special in my work. Don't really feel like I've achieved that much. I get that, my wife will often tell me, or you'll tell me, or family will, that, oh yeah, you've done well. And I kind of hear it, but, to me...
You have to accept it.
it doesn't feel like much, but you know, I don't think I'm dumb now. You know, I feel I was a late bloomer. I definitely, you know, again, and it's funny because I think you'd have to talk to Lydia about her experience of that, because obviously she was on the flip side. She did go to the 11 plus, and she was very clearly smart as a kid, and she was told that. So I'm always fascinated to know, because that will have affected her in different ways. And this was not a case of me being, I was not by any means the lesser child. If anything, I think at times my mum favoured me in lots of ways, but on the intellectual side, it was very clear, Lid's smart and you're not. And but I felt like I bloomed when I went to uni. Up until that point, I failed one of my and I guess it's funny hearing all this stuff on the news at the moment about kids getting their exam results. I never felt any stress getting my exam results. And again, I think I didn't feel any stress ever getting my exam results because I didn't feel smart. So I didn't feel like I was going to get anything good. Yeah. And when I got my GCSEs, it was pretty much C's, D's, like maybe 1B, definitely no A's. Yeah. Went to college rather than grammar school or anything. And I failed my AS English in the first year, which is funny because I ended up becoming a copywriter quite straight after uni, and I love writing. But I failed English the first year. Second year, I passed all my A-levels, which was English, psychology, and philosophy. But even then, I got B, C, C. Didn't get into the course I wanted at Leeds Uni because I needed 3 Bs for that. So I ended up going to Leeds Metropolitan. And it wasn't until I got to uni, and then at uni, I kind of felt like it clicked. And I, you know, definitely, I'd say, increased my intelligence in a way on a book smart level, I suppose. Came out of uni, you know, I got 2-1. Didn't get first, but that was fine. And then, yeah, when I hit the working world, I think where it's helped me out is that, yeah, when I've never felt like I've achieved anything that great, and I'm trying to think, and again, and I even hate kind of talking about this, but I suppose from exec to now to kind of group head of digital, you're probably talking 6, 7, 8 promotions in that 10-year period. It's probably a promotion every year or year and a half. I've never once gone for one. I've never once asked for one. I've never once asked what I need to do to get to the new one, because I've never thought that I kind of deserve it or will get to that point. I've just kind of worked along, done the best I can, and it's happened, which is great. And I do think it is, like I say, it's not a bad thing. I think I see it as being told from an early age that there are some things you're not good at, and being told you're not that smart. Okay, maybe that was a harsh way that she put it, and maybe it shouldn't have been that severe. But it has definitely meant that I've been able to cope with things throughout my working career in a much easier way than what I see young people now. That idea of, you know, if someone told me, okay, you've done this one thing wrong, it would hurt, it would suck, and I'd hate it. But I'd hate it from a point of view of, I should have done better at work. I'd never hate it from a point of view of, how dare someone tell me I've done something wrong, my life's over. Yeah. You know, it would just drive me on to then do it better.
Well, those experiences have built resilience in you, haven't they?
Yeah.
You are able to kind of dust things off and, you know, move on from them. And that's really cool. You're so humble.
I think, but again, to me, I don't feel that humble. I just feel pretty normal.
There's been so many times I've just been like wanting to interrupt you and say, no, come on, just accept this success. Right, I'm going to get off my high horse. Right, we're going to move on to stress. And I suppose I have a bit of an interesting viewpoint on stress, in that I think we get stressed when sometimes we've got either a values conflict going on, or we are not achieving a value. So the example I think of is, so honesty and integrity are really important to me, which means being straightforward with people, but equally other people being happy is really important to me as well. And it's almost why I do the job that I do. You know, state of mind is really important. And so if you've got some really bad news that needs to be delivered in a straightforward and honest way, and also this is going to potentially have an impact on the happiness, then I can feel really conflicted and it will cause stress. But I know that it's got to be delivered, if that makes sense. So that's my perspective on what causes stress. It's not the law. What causes you stress, would you say?
From a work perspective, what causes me stress normally is if I've got more on than, like, I want to be able to do an amazing job on everything. I want to do the best job we can on everything. And what causes me stress is when there's you know, a lot on where I feel like I'm not going to be able to do as good a job as I could on those things, which I find tough. And I will work, you know, very early to very late to try and cover as much stuff as possible, because I hate leaving that stuff undone. At the same time, though, one thing that, you know, again, on that kind of honesty and transparency thing is, I get caught in this middle, because one thing that causes me stress massively is if I feel that other people have all of that on. And I hate it. And I like being able to take stuff away from people and ease their workload and make sure they're, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, you know, kind of working somewhere where they're happy and they like coming to work and they're enjoying it. So I hate, like, one of the things that gives me the most stress is seeing other people really stressed or finding that tough. But at the same time, what does stress me out is when I don't feel that I can rely on, say, colleagues, if they're not being honest or transparent, or if they're letting me down, you know, or, you know, so they're saying they're going to do something and then they don't, or they kind of don't help out where they could, or things aren't done to a certain standard. It does really stress me, and I'm a bit of a control freak like that. I guess, again, that full circle comes back to, you know, again, from that experience growing up of not knowing what's going on. I like to know everything that's going on, and I am absolutely positive if you were to ask some of my colleagues what is annoying about me, is probably that he has to know everything that's going on and he won't let things go, and he takes, you know, and he won't hand over stuff to do, and I'm a nightmare for it. I'll try and keep ownership of everything, which is awful when you're running 4 or 5 departments. You can't own everything. It's not physically possible. But I'll try to. And I've had multiple bosses tell me, you have to delegate that, or you have to let that go, or you have to ask for help. And I really struggle with that, and it stresses me out because I don't want to give it to them. I want to control everything. So yeah, a few different bits that cause me stress, I suppose. But in general, if I'm not in control of everything and doing everything to the best ability, it stresses me out.
Yeah. So, and again, this is a common trait I find with leaders, that they do like to be in control. They do like to create that certainty. So how do you therefore manage your stress? So what are your tools, techniques? How do you deal with it?
Yeah, I think in multiple ways, both inside work and out. Inside of work, as I've got older and I suppose taken on more and more, time management and process management have become huge for me. And straight in my head, I'm thinking about a colleague called Kate from my previous role. If she heard me talking about processes, she'd probably think it wasn't me, because she always used to be great for that, and I was a bloody nightmare. And she used to be very good at putting all processes in place for a lot of my erratic ways of working. But nowadays, it is so important to me because there's so much on. So internally, I'll always be looking at how we can refine processes to make things easier, quicker, better. And in terms of my own work, the process of, you know, I use Trello from a listing point of view of making sure I have all work accounted for at all times and know where everything's at, when things are due, so I can keep on top of everything. And that does help mitigate stress in a way, because a lot of my stress will come from, again, that lack of control. So if I'm the worst place for me, and this actually happened to me a couple of days ago, where one of my departments is going through quite a lot of changes, where we've had, unfortunately, a few people leave, a few people coming in, and it's in a bit of limbo. And I've got one great member of staff who's doing an amazing job at kind of helping that transition period. And I kind of had this realization all of a sudden the other day that I felt, crap, I really am not on top of everything with it, and I don't understand everything that's going on in that department. And that's the kind of thing that will give me a lot of stress. So one of the ways of dealing with it is then, okay, what do I, like, literally listing out, what do I need to know? How can I figure this out? Where will I be? And almost like visualizing. So what do I need to know to get to a point where I am okay with it? And that will be anything from, sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and write a list down on my phone. Because if I've got it in a list and I know what I need to do, it takes the stress out of my mind. If I don't have it written down, I don't have a process and don't have a timeline, I will just sit on it and think about it over and over again until it drives me mad. So I have to kind of get it out, get it down, and know what I'm working on. And again, probably drives my colleagues nuts, because they're like, why does he need to know everything? And why does he have to be on top of me with everything? But it helps me. And then from a personal point, go on, sorry.
No, go on. Okay.
From a personal point of view, I think in the same vein, I tend to like things that distract my mind fully, because if my mind isn't distracted, I then will just dwell on those work things. So things like, I remember one of the first things I took up was juggling. which is a great thing. That sounds ridiculous, but it's a great thing to really take up. When you're learning how to juggle, you can't think about anything else. And I learned for months, and I ended up learning all different tricks and all sorts because it kind of took my mind off work. And then after that, it was guitar, and I taught myself guitar. And again, it was, well, if I'm thinking about this and doing this, it completely takes my mind off anything else. And then probably the easier thing now is reading. I read a lot. I read a lot of science fiction. Love it. It's so far removed from what I do day to day. It's complete, obviously make believe, and it's a complete mind distractor. When you're reading that, you're not thinking about work. Sometimes with reading, obviously, I'll get to the bottom of the page and go, I didn't read that page because I was thinking about work. So then it forces me to concentrate. So yeah, anything that kind of takes my mind off just overthinking everything we've got to do from a work point of view.
I just remembered, do you remember I was running an NLP practitioner training and I got you in to demonstrate juggling, and that was because you enter into what we refer to as a high performance state when you juggle, because you're using both hemispheres.
Yes.
And so I'd forgotten all about that. So yeah, cool.
Stuff that distracts you completely from work is brilliant.
Yeah, no, I like it. And also quite different ways of relaxing as well.
Yeah.
So I was going to say to you, because, I said earlier at the start that you're really brave because you do all your high octane and people. Do you know what he's encouraging his sister to do? Flipping jump out of a plane.
He asked me about that. He wanted to know if I'd do a skydive with her. I said, yeah, of course, I've done plenty of it. He's a little young for it yet, but we'll see.
So what do the high, because you've done, what have you done? Bungee jump, shark swimming?
Whitewater rafting, blackwater rafting, skydives, all sorts, obviously skiing, loads of different bits. I love it for a number of reasons. I love the freedom that comes with it. It does completely blank your mind. You don't think about anything else. And it's a surreal experience. But so bungee jump's probably the one I've done. I think 3 skydives. Bungee jumps I've done 15, 16, if not more. And those are my favorite. And it's only a short amount of time, but it's something very freeing about it. More so for me than a skydive, because with a skydive you're still attached to someone, and it's much more. Again, it's much more kind of contained, and you're with loads of people. With a bungee jump, you're stood there on your own, and then you jump, and it's just you and that feeling. And it is very freeing, and it you can't think of anything else. You're just in the moment completely. And I think that's the thing is, I have a very, sounds awful, I have a very obsessive brain, and I think it's why I've done okay at work, because most of the time my brain obsesses about work. I had a period about 5 years ago where I took 6 months off and didn't work. And when I wasn't working, my brain obsessed about other stuff. It obsessed about relationships and family stuff instead, or I'll obsess about house stuff. But I can't turn my brain off. It goes all the time obsessing about stuff, really to the nth degree, like just over and over again. And something like a bungee jump is incredibly freeing because it just shuts all that off. It's a very freeing experience. It gives me a rush. And I guess that's the best way I can explain it, really.
No, I love it. So just to bring things to a close, what nuggets of genius or advice would you like to pass on, to people that are listening? So, because I feel like I've been kept poking and going, you are successful. I want you to acknowledge that you really are a success. And where do you think that comes from, first of all, before you move on to your nuggets of genius? What do you put it down to?
It's a tough one. I really don't know. I guess a few different things. I put it down to, there's definitely a big part with my working life of, I would say there's an element of seeking approval, whether that be approval of just being, not dumb, approval for recognition of a job well done, because again, growing up, wasn't ever really told that I'd done well. I can't really remember, and I'm sure I was. I'm sure, like most kids are. I don't really remember a time I was ever told like, "Oh, you did really well at that." I mean, again, memories like, you know, it's quite evocative or emotive. But I remember going to I used to play the flute when I was a kid. I remember going to a concert and playing, and my grandparents had taken me, and my mum had said that she would be there before I played. She ended up getting pissed and did. You know, so she wasn't there. So then you kind of felt like, oh yeah, and then she wasn't really bothered that she hadn't come. It wasn't a big deal to her. She kind of was annoyed at me for being upset that she didn't come. And yeah, so I never really got any real recognition or kind of just a pat on the back to say, yeah, you've done well. So it's funny, I think a lot of my success comes from yearning for that. But at the same time, as you rightly pointed out, when I do get that, when someone tells me I've done well, I really shrink away from it. I don't like it. It's very weird when I kind of really want it, but then it doesn't sit well with me. But I think my success is me kind of driving for that. I just want to do a good job and be told I've done a good job. No more, no less. I don't want to achieve anything wild. I don't want mad plaudits. I just want to, do a good job and be recognised of, you've done all right. You've done okay.
And you clearly have to have had all of those promotions. And you know what he failed to mention earlier was the fact that he left a really good job, travelled around the world with his now wife, and came back to an even better job. You know, what are the chances? So
what are the chances?
It just says everything about you. It really does.
Yeah.
So what about these nuggets of genius, advice, experience? What?
I think one thing I'm a big believer of is, well, actually you've referenced one already, which is the on the hiring side of things. It doesn't apply to all industries. Obviously, if you're going to hire a doctor, they need to know how to be a doctor. But for our industry, I'm a big believer of the right person and the right culture fit. And I always say in any interview, we'll do interviews where someone might have a year's worth of experience versus someone that has no experience. But the person with a year's worth of experience doesn't feel right. There's not a right culture fit there, or we don't like their attitude or their way of working. And again, I always say, we can teach people how to do digital marketing. We can teach people the work, but we can't teach people to be better people. We can't teach people not to be ourselves. If they're going to come in and they're not going to fit on a personal level, it doesn't matter how good they are at the work. So I am a big believer at looking at that, the person as a whole. And again, another shout out on that, I suppose. There was a guy who worked for me for many years, a guy called Josh. And when he came in to Jellyfish, he was a window cleaner, and he'd never done a day in digital marketing in his life. And he came in and he applied because he liked the look of the place. He'd read about it online and thought this is a good industry. Now, if I was to compare him to some of the other CVs I had at that time, I would have had people who'd done diplomas in digital or had been doing online courses or had internships. But this guy had the right attitude. He then grew amazingly, and he went from exec, having no experience, to PPC director in 6 years, and did a fantastic job. And he was one of the best people I ever hired. And he won't forget. He'll remind me I've said that now. And so I'm a big believer in the people rather than just the experience. I think is really important. So that would be one. I suppose the other thing that I'm a big believer in, and I like to kind of talk about when I get the opportunity on something like this, is that I like to tell people that it's okay not to be okay. It's a saying that goes around a lot lately, and I really mean that. I think I worry for people who, we have a generation now probably more and more in touch with their feelings and more in touch with kind of mental health issues. I've had a lot of personal experience with that. I've gone through some really tough times. I've had private counselling, and I've come through it well. I think it's easy to look at people in higher positions and think, well, the difference between me and them is their life is just perfect. They've got there because everything's been easy and great for them. And that's not the case. People in really high up positions struggle with this stuff as well. And so don't put yourself down. If you do struggle, that's okay. And it's okay to struggle and still do well at work. And it's okay to struggle and still want to be ambitious. You might be really struggling at home, but if you still want to be ambitious at work, that's fine. And I'd like people to know that if you are struggling with that stuff, it doesn't mean that you can't then be successful at work or that it should hold you back in any which way. It's totally fine to struggle with all that stuff, and you're not alone in it. And yeah, I guess that would be the key thing for me.
See, that is the modern take on leadership that I was thinking of, and you made my hair stand on end as you were talking about that stuff, because it takes real bravery to be that honest. And that's what I've loved about this interview, is your honesty, straightforwardness, your insights. And you know, you've achieved so much, as I've already said, but also very what you said previously about, you know, not recruiting arseholes and culture fit and all that sort of thing. It really does fit with the whole Amazon thing, and it explains, doesn't it, that the fit wasn't right. There was probably a values conflict, and you know, what's more important to you is working as part of that team. Your advice there in action, how you've grown and developed someone, and they succeed as well. Which again, incidentally, the other interesting thing I found useful about interviewing both you and your dad is how alike you are. You know, he is very similar from that perspective, in that he'll see potential in someone and he'll grow and develop them. And again, I think that's another amazing trait of a great leader. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Really appreciate the time. And yeah, thank you.